This program is brought to you by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.
I am excited to be here. This is the room I have lectured in for, I guess, the last 10 years. Before that, I did Dinkelspiel and Mem Aud and I guess all the major lecture halls. But what's wrong with all of those? They're not meant for lecture, they're meant for performance. So there's a big orchestra pit, and the nearest student is 20 feet away. So I just insisted on this more intimate setting. So today, I'm going to talk to you about the journey from the psychology of evil to the psychology of heroism. So the evil part is something I've been doing for too many years. The hero part is the exciting new direction in which my career is going to go from now on. And some of you might want to get involved in this project. So it's going to be a hot talk, and hopefully it'll be dazzling. So the question, what makes people go wrong, is a question that has been asked for centuries. Philosophers ask it, theologians ask it, poets, dramatists. Psychologists don't ask that kind of question. In fact, it's not a topic in any psychology book, Psychology of Evil, because psychologists tend to ask very specific, precise questions for which we have really good techniques of answering, experimental methods, assessment methods. But I was asking that question for a long time, but I rephrase it. Why do good people turn evil? It's no big deal if a bad person does bad things, but somebody who otherwise everybody would agree this is a good person, man or woman, and suddenly at some point crosses that line and begins to engage in behavior we would all acknowledge as evil. But I've been asking that question for a long time, and the reason is psychologists are optimists. That is, when we think we understand something, we want to prevent it, we want to change it, we want to make it better, we want to enhance the human condition. So it's not simply an abstract understanding of what makes good people go bad. It's if we can figure that out, then maybe we can develop strategies to prevent good people from doing that. I grew up in the ghetto in the South Bronx in New York, and I was asking those questions when I was a little kid, long before I became trained as a psychologist, because I had friends who I knew were really good kids who got in really bad trouble. Some of them killed people, some of them got killed, some went to prison. And so I was just trying to understand, how could either I be so wrong, or what happened? What made these kids do the really bad thing? And I was also influenced by reading Robert Louis Stevenson's famous Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, in which you remember that the good Dr. Jekyll invents some chemical, which when he takes it, he's transformed into the evil Mr. Hyde. When the drug wears off, what happens is he goes back across that line, the line between good and evil, and begins again to be good, takes the drug again, and crosses the line into evil. Although Robert Louis Stevenson's fictional account of how a good person can turn evil by taking some magical chemical, that for me, what I focused on was that line. Because the line between good and evil, I had been led to believe, was permanent, was fixed. And in the story, even though it's fictional, here's somebody crossing the line and going back and forth. So it made me entertain the possibility that the line between good and evil is permeable, is not static. Maybe it moves. Maybe there are times at which you get very close to that line, and maybe times you cross it. Because we've all been led to believe that we are good people. We're on that side of the line. And what's comforting to believe is that me and we and us, our kind and kin, are on the good side, and the bad people are on the other side. Well, Robert Louis Stevenson's fictional account says maybe under some circumstances, good people can be drawn across that line. And that's what my talk is going to be about today. How is it possible for ordinary people to do really bad things without the magical chemical? And that's what my talk is going to be about today. So I want to start with this wonderful illusion by the Swiss artist M.C. Escher. I'd like you to focus on it for a minute or 2 minutes while the really tardy people come in. And I'd like you to focus on the white as the figure and the black as the background. It's sometimes easy if you just squint. And what you see is a world full of angels. Angels, 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 angels. Presumably, some of you have not been able to see the world as filled with angels. Some of you focused on the black as the figure and the white as the background. So for those whose vision is problematic, let's expand it. And now what we see is here's the horns, and here's the eyes, and here's the wings, and it's a world full of demons, okay? And so and now once you see the white as the angels and the black as demons, you can't go back to seeing one or the other, okay? And for me, this is important for several reasons. One, it says the world will always be filled with both good and evil. It's part of the yin and yang of the human condition. But it also reminds me, when I was a kid, I was religious, and it reminded me that God's favorite angel was called Lucifer. The name Lucifer means the light. In some scriptures, he's referred to as the morning star, top of the line angel. It's never quite clear what he did to get to that elevated position, but it's clear what he did to get kicked out of heaven. When God created Adam, apparently he told the angels, Adam is my perfect creature, I want you to honor him. Lucifer and a number of other angels said, doesn't make sense. He's a mere mortal, we are angels, and we existed prior to him. Well, that was a God who was not into conflict resolution. He said, you just committed two sins, sin of disobedience to ultimate authority, namely moi, and secondly, it's a sin of pride. And you know what happens, what goeth before pride? The fall. So what God did is he got St. Michael, who was probably second in command, a lot of sibling rivalry there, with other good angels, and they kicked out the disobedient angels. And not only kicked them out, what happened is God created hell. It's a paradox. God, all-loving, is the person who created hell as the site, as the venue to store evil. And so he casts out all these fallen angels, and Lucifer then gets transformed from the light to the devil to Satan. And this is the start of evil as we know it, at least in Christian scripture. For me, it sets the context for studying how ordinary people first begin to do evil, because here is the most cosmic transformation imaginable. God's favorite angel becomes the devil. I mean, there's no further boundaries. So I'm looking at people who are not angels, just ordinary people like any of us or any of you, who do bad things, not devilish things, just bad things. So there are a lot of definitions of evil, religious ones, political ones, philosophical ones. My psychological definition of evil, it says, evil is the exercise of power. And I'm going to focus on that as the core. It's people are exercising power, dominance, control over other people, and they're doing it intentionally to harm others psychologically through prejudice, through discrimination, through dehumanization, to hurt others physically through torture, through rape, to destroy mortally, to kill people. And when it's practiced at the level of the nation state, then it's to commit crimes against humanity. That is, as we saw in Rwanda, as we saw obviously in Nazi Germany. 4 years ago, many of you saw, or probably all of you saw the same images I saw on 2020 of American soldiers, men and women, putting themselves in pictures of abusing Iraqi prisoners. Now, we know soldiers do bad things in war. We know guards do bad things in prisons. But we had never seen this documented in this way. Okay? And we've never seen women, as well as men, putting themselves in the picture. If you put yourself in the picture, you're obviously convicted. So one of the big questions is, what were they thinking? But immediately, this went around the world. These pictures went around the world, and it was humiliating for the Bush administration, our American military. And immediately, the president got on television. General Myers, the head of Joint Chiefs of Staff, went before Congress and said what? This is the work of a few bad apples. This is the work of a few rogue soldiers. Do not blame the military. Our soldiers are 99.9% perfect. And Meyer went on to say, we know it's not systemic. Well, that's a lie. He couldn't know it without having done an investigation of all the prisons. So as soon as he said, we know, that means it's suspicious. But what's important is, I argued maybe the American soldiers were good apples, and maybe the barrel was bad. Maybe it was the barrel that corrupted them. What does that mean? The barrel is the situation. The barrel is the context. The barrel is Abu Ghraib prison night shift. So that's a hypothesis. Is it the person or is it the situation? It's like one of the most fundamental issues that psychologists deal with. Well, how are you going to answer that? I mean, I'm a psychologist here. Well, it turns out that the lawyer for one of the guards, Chip Frederick, who was the sergeant who should have been in charge, heard me on NPR saying bad barrel versus bad apple, asked me would I be part of the defense team. At first I said, no, what they did is horrendous. He said, but if you join our team, you can get the evidence to answer your hypothesis. Namely, you could interview him, you can give psychological testing. You could get access to all of the investigative reports. You know, it's a dozen reports, mostly by generals, one by Secretary of State James Schlesinger, who's the head of, who was the Secretary of Defense before Rumsfeld. And you could see all the 1,000 pictures. What you saw on television, we also saw 12 pictures. This is more than 1,000. Okay? So I agreed. So I said, okay, I'll bite. I become part of the defense team. I spend a day with him and his family. I become an investigative reporter, essentially. I talk to military people at all different levels who were there. I read all the 12 reports. I think I'm the only one in the world who's read these. There's like a dozen really thick ones. And in chapter 50 of my book, I go through many of the highlights of many of these reports. And I look at all these pictures. So I want to begin, because evil is this vague thing, okay? I want to begin by showing you a case study of evil. So let's say, you know, in medical school, you have a case study with, it's going to be, here's a patient. Well, here's the case study of evil. We're going to look at what I call digitally documented depravity, a set of these pictures that everyone came from the soldiers' cameras. I put them together to make them more dramatic, more emotional. I put sound, I put movement in. The important thing is, all of the pictures came from only one place, Abu Ghraib prison. There are a lot of prisons in Iraq, military prison. They came from only a single place there called Tier 1A, and they only happened at night shift. They didn't happen on the day shift at Tier 1A. So that we have to know. Why the night shift? Why here? Why there? So let's go down to that dungeon together. So I end with the irony of Leonardo da Vinci's Ode to Humanity superimposed on a prisoner who puts his arm out. He was mentally ill. He covered himself with his shit every day, and the soldiers would roll him in dirt so he wouldn't stink up the place, or they'd put him between gurneys. When Frederick, who was in charge, Chip Frederick, complained, They said, this is war. We don't have, there was no mental health facilities, no health facility to begin with. The soldier was face painted. He was on duty, wearing a Harley Davidson cap. Anybody here had military background knows what. How could he have, in quote, the balls to be on duty dressed like that? Only because he knew there would never be a senior officer who came down. In fact, in 3 months, no senior officer ever went down to the dungeon in the night shift. Okay? Why did it happen only on Tier 1A? Tier 1A was the interrogation center. It was the main interrogation center for all of Iraq. Anybody who picked up, they thought was related to Al-Qaeda, and then in 2003, in the fall, the insurgency broke out. Just when we thought we had won the war, mission accomplished, they're going to come and love us and kiss us, they're killing us, okay? And so they started arresting whole families, all the men in the whole area. Any place there was an explosion. And when Frederick got there in September, there were 200 prisoners. In 2 months, there was 1,000. And there's 9 guards protecting 1,000 prisoners. Not only that, Frederick is in charge of 60 Iraqi policemen who are smuggling weapons in and drugs to the prisoners. So he's got 9 guards, 1,000 prisoners, 60 Iraqi guards. He had been a guard. He had been a low-level guard in a little prison in Pennsylvania. Because he was a guard, they said, okay, you do this job. He had 0 training. None of the soldiers there had any training for mission-specific combat. In fact, they were not real soldiers. They were Army reservists, weekend soldiers from a little town in Appalachia sent to this dungeon. So when stuff is breaking out, in that Tier 1A, there's 3 interrogation teams. There is military intelligence. That's Tier 1A was the military intelligence hold. Military police, their job is to maintain the security of the prison. That's it. There's also CIA there doing interrogations. And in addition, there is America's outsourcing of work. So there's a 3rd set of interrogators from the Titan Corporation, a private corporation. So there's 3 sets of interrogators, and they're getting nothing. They're interrogating they're getting no what's called actionable intelligence. So Bush is crazy, Rumsfeld is crazy, Cheney is crazy, the generals above are all crazy. So military intelligence goes to the head of military police and says, you guys have to help us. So for the first time, military police are told you have to soften the prisoners up, you have to take the gloves off, you have to prepare them for interrogation, you have to do whatever you have to do so that when we interrogate them, they're going to talk. So here's these Army reservists, nine of them on the night shift, Frederick is in charge, who are told, do whatever you have to do to get these guys to talk. Not only that, at first, military intelligence prepares some of the situations that they take pictures of. And this comes from General Karpinski, who was supposed to be in charge of the prison. Because then what they would do is show the pictures of the guy, Lindy Eglin pulling the guy with the leash. They'd show them to people who are going to interrogate to say, that's going to be you, or you're going to be at the bottom of the pile. So they facilitated the picture taking. Once they started taking pictures, then the guy said, everybody's got a cell phone, everybody's got a digital camera. They took pictures of everything, pictures of dead people. They didn't kill anyone, but it was a morbid curiosity. The other problem was, you now had 1,000 guys, most of whom are naked, either because they didn't have enough uniforms or because that was one of Rumsfeld's interrogation tactics to produce dehumanization. You have guys walk around naked. But also, in this group, you had 3 women and 6 men, which is, again, a sexual dynamic in this thing. And you had guys walking around naked. And as you saw, they start getting the prisoners to masturbate publicly, to simulate fellatio and so forth. And it turns out some of the soldiers there also began to have sexual contact with one another. So it was a nightmare situation. So here's Rumsfeld comes down. He wants to know who's the bad apples, okay? He's the bad apple. In my book, I outline a set of 8 interrogation procedures that he authorized for Guantanamo, including dogs, including sensory deprivation, stress positions, putting people on boxes, having them stand bent over for several hours, nakedness, et cetera, et cetera. The general at Guantanamo, General Miller, took those to Abu Ghraib and said, we have to Gitmoize. Guantanamo is called Gitmoize Abu Ghraib so you can get information. So how do psychologists go about understanding such transformation of human behavior? If you say these were ordinary, maybe they weren't good people, they were ordinary people to begin with, and now they did these terrible things. The most basic way is we call dispositional. You say, what does the person bring into the situation? We want to know about genes, we want to know personality trait, we want to know about character. That's the most typical way that we all think about the causes of human behavior. We want to say, let's understand the mind of the killer when we have a high school shooting. Psychologists like me come along and say, wait, people are not alone on the stage of life. There's always other actors, there's always costumes, there's always a stage manager, there's always stage direction, there's props. We call that the situation, and I call that the bad barrel. But it's only when I started studying Abu Ghraib in great detail that I realized that no one asked the question, who creates the bad barrel? And that's the system. The system is the broad influences on human behavior from the cultural, political, especially legal, economic. And so when you want to understand behavior, you can't just stop here, because the person is in the situation, and the situation is embedded in the system. And this is as true of corporate corruption as it is to inadequate educational systems, that we always focus on the individual, and we don't give enough attention to the situation, and we rarely give attention to the system. The system is where the power is. So the Lucifer effect says we've got to understand character transformation at these three levels. It's the dynamic interplay of the person. What does the person bring in the situation? What does the situation bring out of the individual? And what are the dominant systems that control that? So the Lucifer effect, although the first 15 chapters of the book are grim. There's 8 chapters on the Stanford Prison Study, which I'll get into in a little briefly. And then there's chapters on Abu Ghraib, and then it's all the research trying to prove that the power of the situation. It's only the last chapter where I finally was overwhelmed, and I say, and that's where I introduced the whole idea of ordinary heroes and celebrating heroism. But really, the book is about, my thinking is about that the human mind gives us the infinite capacity to be anything. Anything anybody's ever done, we could be. We could be kind or cruel, we could be caring or indifferent, we could be creative or destructive, and it pushes some of us to be villains, to do the terrible things we read about in the paper all the time, or in our history books. But the good news is it pushes some of us to be heroes, and that's where I want to end today. So the Lucifer effect was published 1.5 years ago. It's now being picked up in Italian and German versions, in Polish and Korean, and it's making an impact around the world. It's a great cartoon in the New Yorker, which is my whole talk. I could end here. I'm neither a good cop nor a bad cop, Jerome. Like yourself, I'm a complex amalgam of positive and negative personality traits that emerge or not depending on the circumstances. So that's the talk. Well, I want to start. So what I'm going to do is present 3 examples of classic research on the power of the situation. Some of these you know, but some of you don't know in great detail. I came down the elevator with some people. We're talking about some of this. So the first study is a little Jewish kid from the Bronx, Stanley Milgram, wants to know, could the Holocaust happen in America? People say, no, it can't happen in America. That was Nazi Germany. It's 1930. That's Hitler. He said, how do you know? Suppose somebody like Hitler, suppose a powerful authority asked you to electrocute a stranger and gave you a good reason to do it. Would you do it? No way. How do you know? How do you know unless you're in the situation whether you would give in to authority or resist? So that's his basic question. And the research he did back in 1963 was the first of its kind. And what's amazing about it, he tested 1,000 ordinary citizens, 500 in New Haven, Connecticut, 500 in Bridgeport. No students, no college students, no high school students. And so that's it. So it's the most representative study ever done in social science. And essentially what his ad said, we want barbers, we want truck drivers, we want postmen. 18 of the 19 studies he did were with men, but he also did one with women. And we'll see whether women are any different than men. But why did he do the study? Let's see what he says in his own words.
When I learn of incidents such as the massacre of millions of men, women, and children perpetrated by the Nazis in World War II, how is it possible, I ask myself, that ordinary people, who are courteous and decent in everyday life, can act callously, inhumanely, without any limitations of conscience? Now, there are some studies in my discipline, social psychology, that seem to provide a clue to this question. The problem I wanted to study was a little different. It went a little bit further. It was the issue of authority. Under what conditions would a person obey authority who commanded actions that went against conscience?
So in his study, let's say two men come. He says, We want to understand human memory. Memory is the most important thing to get ahead in life. And we know that if you reward the right answers, people learn. Nobody's ever studied what happens if you punish errors. That's what we're all about. You're going to be a teacher, he's going to be the learner. So you give people respectable roles. The important thing is you start with an ideology. We want to help people through science, okay? So that's a good big ideology. And then he gives you respectable roles. He gives you a way to follow through on those roles. He gives you information. Here's the learner, middle-aged, nice guy, gets hooked up to the shocking system. Here's the experimenter. So the experiment's going to be authority in the lab coat. And he tells him, when he makes an error, you press the first of these 30 buttons. It's only 15 volts. And each successive increment is only 15 volts. The most basic lesson from this study is all evil begins with 15 volts. You hardly know, nobody notices. And every increment is not even noticeably different. Except now the guy keeps making mistakes and he's inside, he's yelling, and you're pressing more and more, and you get up to 100 volts. He says, hey, I got a heart condition, I shouldn't be doing this, I want out. And you're a good person, you turn to the experiment and say, sir, who will be responsible if anything happens to him? The experiment says, I will be responsible, of course, teach it, continue. So now we have diffusion of responsibility as a major social psychological process. That when you think you are not accountable for your behavior, then you're more likely to be swept along to do things you ordinarily would not when you are accountable. And so it continues on, and at the end is 450 volts. You start at 15, and essentially when it gets up to 330, the guy screams, there's a thud and silence. And you say, sir, somebody should go see him. The experiment says, I'm sorry, you don't understand the rules. A failure to respond is an error of omission, which is the same as error of commission. Continue to shock teacher. Okay, so the people in the study were 20 years old to 50 years old, New Haven, Bridgeport. Do a critical thinking exercise. You are there to help the guy improve his memory. He's unconscious or dead. Why would you continue to shock him? Doesn't make sense. So everybody should drop out at that point. And the basic question is, would anybody go to 450 volts? So that's Milgram's question. Because if he's unconscious at 375, you're going to give him 5 more, you could kill him. So would anybody go? Milgram asked 40 psychiatrists. He presented this study like I did without the drama. He said, what % of American citizens will go to 450 volts? They said, on average, 1%. Because that's sadistic behavior, and only sadists would engage in sadistic behavior. Go back to the 3 ways I said analyzing behavior. Psychiatrists stop at the disposition. For psychiatrists, everything is in the head of the person. And they ignored all the situational things. The roles, the lab coat, the procedures starting with 15 volts, a foot in the door, a diffusion of responsibility. So what were the results? This is the number of people who drop out for each. No one drops out before 285 volts, and 450, 2/3, 65%. 2 out of every 3. She didn't do it, he did, he did. He didn't do it, but they did. 2 of every 3 in the study. Okay. So this was shocking. I mean, it shocked the world, and in a very literal sense. But I said he tested 1,000 people. In each study, he only run 50 or 60. So let's look at, so here's 16 studies. And what he showed, in each study, he varies one variable, one thing about the situation. He doesn't put more good people or bad people in. So in study 16, 91% of the people go all the way, 9 out of 10. In study 16, if you first see somebody like you go all the way, you go all the way. In study 5, it goes down to 10%. If you see people like you rebel, you rebel. So it says a powerful influence on a behavior is what we see other people do, because they almost set the norm. They set what is acceptable. People rebel, you rebel. People give in to authority, you give in to authority. And that's why when I'm going to talk later about the importance of creating a nation of heroes, heroes model this rebellion against unjust authority. What about women? Study 13, no different than men, 62%. So essentially what this study does, these results, it's like putting a dial on human nature. You could get almost everyone, 9 out of 10, shocking this guy, 2/3 down to 40, and then almost none, simply by varying some aspect of the social situation. So it's like the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. Instead of the chemical, you're just now varying one aspect of the social situation. I did a lot of research, which I don't have time to talk about today, saying another way you get good people to do bad things is you make them anonymous. You put them in a situation where they think nobody knows who I am and nobody cares. In a small group, in the dark, you take away their names, give them numbers. And we showed that with women, will shock other women in the condition where they are anonymous and they don't do it where they are identifiable. An anthropologist at Harvard read about my research and said, does it make a difference if warriors go to war having changed their appearance or not in how they treat their victims? And he said, we know in some cultures they just go to war, they don't change their appearance. In others, they paint themselves like in Lord of the Flies, if you remember that story. They put on masks, or in most cultures, we put men in something called uniforms. And what a uniform does is it takes away your individuality. You are all the same. If you look at it, you can't tell one person from another. So what he did is he found 23 cultures where there were 2 bits of data. Do the warriors change their appearance? 15 cultures do, and not. 8 cultures don't. And his measure was not pressing a button on a box. Is do they kill, torture, mutilate the victims? The most extreme outcome you can imagine. And he found 13 cultures that were high on this and 10 that were low. If they don't change their appearance, only 1 kills, torture, mutilates. And as you can expect, when they change their appearance, 12 of 13, 90%, kill, torture, mutilate. So laboratory research like Milgram's, or I'm going to talk about a little Stanford Prison study, are really artificial attempts to get at real-world conditions. Here is what's happening in the real world, the same phenomena. Anything that makes you anonymous takes away your sense of identifiability, lowers your feeling of accountability, lowers your sense of compassion, empathy for other people. So my colleague Albert Bandura, some of you may have taken his courses, probably the most important psychologist in the world, he says another way you can get good people to do bad things is simply get them to think of the enemy, think of others as the enemy, and secondly, to dehumanize them. Think of them as less than human, as animals. And he's done important research to show that ordinary students, if they think another group, somebody labels them as animals, then again, they're much more likely to shock them and shock them very badly. Okay, that's good. So we know in Rwanda, in 1994, one day the Hutu government said, the Tutsis, your neighbors, are cockroaches, literally. And therefore you must destroy, like you would destroy a cockroach. They gave every man a machete, every woman a club, and in 100 days, they murdered 800,000 of the neighbors. It's the most extreme kind of intense mass murder that we know about. And of course, the world stood by and did nothing. Here's a sad picture, a Tutsi child drawing his mother's beheading. They often made the kids watch when the parents did. And so this leads us quickly to Stanford Prison Experiment. We did use college students from all over the country who were in the Stanford area finishing summer school here at Berkeley. We said prison study for going to be for 1 to 2 weeks. 75 volunteers took personality tests. We gave them clinical interviews. We picked 24 that were most normal, most healthy. On day 1, August 14, 1971, we knew we had only good apples in a very bad barrel that we created actually around the corner here. Actually, through that door down there. And then the key is, for research, we flipped a coin. Guard, prisoner, guard, prisoner. So there was no basis, no reason why someone is a guard other than by chance. It's not that somebody did something wrong, somebody was better or worse in any way. And so the study began like this.
Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing. Prisoner 819 did a bad thing.
Police car pulls up in front, and a cop comes to the front door and knocks and says he's looking for me. So they, right there, they took me out the door, they put my hands against the car. It was a real cop car, it was a real policeman, and there were real neighbors in the street who didn't know that I was, this was an experiment. And there was cameras all around and neighbors all around. They put me in the car, then they drove me around Palo Alto. They took me to the police station, the basement of the police station. Then they put me in a cell. I was the first one to be picked up, so they put me in a cell, which is just like a room with a door with bars on it. You could tell it wasn't a real jail. They locked me in there in this degrading little outfit. They were taking this experiment too seriously.
Well, indeed we were. So the prisoners, we're going to dehumanize the prisoners. They become numbers. They can't use their names anymore. They wear smocks with no underpants. The guards, of course, are going to have military-like uniforms, symbols of power. And it all begins, as you saw in Abu Ghraib, push-ups. It all begins with some menial thing, and then it gets worse and worse over time, in part because guards get bored. Boredom is a major motivation of evil, because the way you undo boredom is what? You do something arousing, something different, something unique. And I'm going to skip this. So humiliating tasks, cleaning toilet bowls out with their bare hands, and on. And then it gets sexual. Okay? It only took 3 days in our study to get sexual. Abu Ghraib, it took a couple of weeks. Prisoners get stripped naked, they're sexually taunted. And the kid you saw, the first one to get arrested, he broke down in 36 hours. So again, he modeled how you get out of the prison. Each day thereafter, each night thereafter, another prisoner broke down until five prisoners had to be released. And we ended the study after 6 days, rather than go 2 weeks. It was out of control. I felt I could not go to sleep. I couldn't control the guards because the level of aggression, hostility every day was significantly greater than the previous day. Guards worked 8-hour shifts. They went home. There were three sets of guards who came in morning, afternoon, and evening. The prisoners, of course, lived there around the clock. We have a wonderful website I would love you to visit, prisonexp.org. More than 10 million people have visited this since we put it up about 10 years ago. It has videos and all the slides and everything I've written about it. It's now in German, Spanish, Polish, Italian. We just put it in Farsi, so it's again going around the world. So very quickly, what are the factors that make good people do bad things? Mindlessly taking that first small step. Dehumanization of others, de-individuation of self, anything that makes you feel anonymous, diffusion of personal responsibility, blind obedience to authority, uncritical conformity to group norms. Groups usually are good for us. Some groups are bad, like gangs and cults, and we give them the same uncritical conformity that we do groups that do deserve it. Passive tolerance of evil. A lot of evil is done by people who look the other way, or smile, so that it's the good guards who keep the prison going by not ever interfering with the bad guards. And lastly, it's accepting an ideology that justifies evil. Dostoevsky says, nothing is easier than to denounce the evildoer, nothing more difficult than understanding him. So psychology does not excuse theology. Understanding does not excuse the behavior. People are guilty. I mean, I said, Chip Frederick, he's guilty. He should serve a sentence. But the situational imperative says, the sentence should be mitigated. He should not have gotten 8 years in prison for what he did. So what are the real world parallels? Compare these prisoners going to parole board with this, captives with bags in Guantanamo. Because they want to go green, they stop putting bags. They use sandbags. Forced fellatio in Abu Ghraib was matched in Basra by British soldiers, having prisoners stripped naked, only they didn't put themselves in the picture. In the Stanford Prison study, in 5 days, our guards had the prisoners simulate sodomy with each other. So I'm just going to... James Schlesinger, in his report, said, psychologists have attempted to understand how and why individuals and groups who usually act humanely can sometimes act otherwise in certain circumstances. That's both the cartoon and that's the Lucifer effect. And he says, the landmark Stanford study provides a cautionary tale for all military detention operations. It should have been so. They knew it. In fact, there are people who said they purposely used the Stanford Prison study because the worst abuses in my study happened on night shift, because there was minimal supervision, because I was sleeping some of the time. And they knew that, and that's one of the reasons no senior officer went down at night. You tell the guards, do whatever you have to do, and there's no oversight, no supervision, and you get those kinds of things. They never expected them to take pictures. In fact, a book just came out by a friend of mine, Larry James. He was sent to fix hell. After all of the guards went to prison, if that's the reason, it's over. In fact, he went to change the situation so it wouldn't happen again. So that means that the military admitted after the fact that it was the situation that was the main cause. I'm going to skip this. Okay. So a paradigm shift is needed in psychology, psychiatry, all of social science, especially in law, because all of them focus on the medical model, the individual, sufferer, the guilty one, and we treat the individual. We put him in prison, we give him therapy, if you're benign, etc. But if it's the situation, it never works. And that's why evil continues. That's why prejudice continues. That's why violence continues. You have to switch to a public health model that recognizes that all behavior is situationally and contextualized and is part of a system. And it's like when there's a flu epidemic. You don't treat every single person with the flu. You inoculate the healthy ones to prevent them from getting it. So we have to develop prevention tactics for bullying, for racism, for corruption, one of the worst evils around the world, and for violence. The line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, says Alexander Solzhenitsyn, a poet. He spent time here at the Hoover Institute, but he was also in the worst prisons of Stalin's Gulag Archipelago. So he says it's not an abstraction. Good and evil are things, again, philosophers talk about. Every day of your life, you are making little decisions to cheat or not, to violate some little law or not, or bigger law. You don't get the corruption that we saw in Wall Street. You don't get the corruption of Bear Stearns, Enron, all of these companies. It's not the first time. Without people stepping the first 15 volts, making a little cheat, a little thing. And then they notice in this case, they notice other people doing it. So that supported them doing more and more. And finally, I argue that the terrible thing about greed is it takes people who are usually rationally future-oriented and makes them narrowly present hedonistic. There's a famous study I'm going to talk about this afternoon done by Walter Mischel here in the Bing Nursery. You get kids, 4 years old, and you say, hey, you just won a treat. Here's a marshmallow. If you wait till I come back, you can have 2. Of course, it pays to wait if you like 1. Half the kids can't wait. As soon as he leaves, they're eating the marshmallow. And I just redid the study with chocolate. It's exactly like the traders on Wall Street. That normally, it makes sense, to wait. You get the bigger reward, so you get a lower risk, lower yield. But somebody's promising high risk, high yield, and they become like 4-year-old kids who cannot delay gratification. That's one of the psychological reasons for what we just experienced. So in the last 10 minutes, so we have another wonderful website, lucifereffect.com, which has everything about the book. I'm working with 2 ministers, so there's Lucifer Goes to Church. So each week they have a blog on theology and psychology. The whole section celebrating heroism, how to resist influence. And we put on trial George Tenet from the CIA, Rumsfeld, Cheney, and Bush. And up to now, at least 90% of the people voting, there's been more than 2,500, says they are in complicity for the crimes at Abu Ghraib, having created a system that created a situation that did those terrible things. So what makes some people do good, some people do evil? Now, obviously, I've rushed. Just give me a brief overview, focusing on the situation. But let's quickly focus in the last 10 minutes on it's time to promote social goodness, moral courage, and heroism. So we want to end on a positive note. Heroism is the main antidote to evil. Instead of saying, let's find evil and try to fix it, to say, to the extent that we have a generation of young people who are willing to be heroes, that's going to be the main bulwark against evil. And my notion is we want to promote the heroic imagination. We want every child to say, I'm a hero in waiting for the right situation to come along, to act heroically. Okay? And when my time comes, I will act. I will be prepared to act. I will be ready to act. So we want people to self-label, I'm a hero in waiting. And the reason you're going to be able to do that is that most heroes are ordinary people. Hannah Arendt, in trying to understand Eichmann, talked about the banality of evil, saying, you know, monsters like Eichmann, before and after they're put in that situation of Auschwitz, were normal. You put them in a situation, you give them a job, they're like the teachers in the Milgram study. They can do horrendous things. I argue that the equivalent is the banality of heroism, that most heroes are ordinary people. It's the act of heroism that's extraordinary. That you don't have to have special attributes. You don't have to be more religious, more compassionate, more empathetic, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Martin Luther King, Mother Teresa, they are exceptions because they give up, sacrifice their whole life for a moral cause. And in fact, that's why we know their name. They are the exceptions. Most heroes are one-time heroes. You don't know their name. They rise to the occasion. In fact, the terrible thing is our kids have all these fantasy heroes. In this new program on television, Heroes, again, these people fly, they get invisible, you know, they do have all these great attributes. That's not us. We are ordinary people with none of those special attributes, except we are ordinary everyday heroes and you're going to emerge in certain situations. So here's a physical hero. Here's the guy, Chinese student, stood in front of a row of tanks coming to crush the students rebelling at Tiananmen Square. Those tanks had, in fact, previously killed 6 students, drove over them. And he was able to persuade the tank commander to turn around and go away. Now, we don't know what happened to him. Some people say he's dead, he's in prison. I know one of the student leaders in the rebellion say they have not been able to track him down. But this is physical courage. Some of you watch the Olympics know here's a hero, this little kid, 9-year-old. He was in that terrible earthquake in China. Most of the kids in his class were crushed, killed. He survived. What he did when he got out of the rubble, he ran in and he helped 2 other kids to survive, pulled them out. And they said, "Why did you do it?" He said, "I was the hall monitor. It was my job to look after my classmates." So here's a kid who's learned the sense of duty, the respect for other people, the sense of, you know, a moral commitment to other people. The reason Abu Ghraib stopped is this guy, the most ordinary person in the universe, Joe Darby from a little town in Pennsylvania. His buddy showed him these pictures on a CD. Those pictures were on screensavers. The soldiers were proud of what they were doing. That's why they kept taking the pictures. They were bragging rights. They said, look what we could do that nobody's ever thought to do, because Army reservists are the lowest at the bottom of the food chain in the military. The only thing lower than them is what? The prisoners. He looks at these and he said, no, this is terrible. We're supposed to bring freedom to these people, and we're dehumanizing them. He takes this, he gives it to a senior officer, and he starts the investigation. Was he a hero? He had to hide with his mother and sister for 3 years because everybody wanted to kill him. Not only the other soldiers who all got in trouble, people in his hometown. His newspaper said, the newspaper in his town said, Joe Darby the snitch, because he humiliated the military and the Bush administration. I'm going to have to skip this. So heroes are prepared to act. Here's another little kid his father couldn't wake up. The kid calls the Australian equivalent 911. The emergency goes to the wrong place. They call him back. He redirects them, and his father was saved by this action. So here's preparation. So the family, you know, kids have to know to use the emergency thing. They have to know where they live. They have to know how to give directions. So it's the Boy Scout motto. It's not just thinking a hero. You have to have some of the skills, some of the talents. Flying around all day just won't cut it. Sooner or later, you're going to have to fight some evil. So heroes are people who take action. In Poland, there's a hero, Irina Sendler. She saved 2,500 Jewish children of certain death from the Nazis. The Nazis had formed a ghetto in Warsaw and put all the Jews there. And very soon, disease broke out and hunger. People are dying. She gets a nurse's pass. She was a social worker, goes in and persuades the parents of these kids to give her their kids, somebody they don't know. She took them out one at a time, and then she organized a network. So the critical thing about heroes is it doesn't pay to be a single hero. It pays to form a network. And she formed a network with 20 other Polish Catholics, and they took 2,500 kids out, put them with different families, hid them, and the idea is at the end of the war, if the families were discovered, were safe, they reunited the kids. She was arrested, she was tortured, she never gave the information about where the kids were, and she only became a hero recently. Because right after that, the communists came in, and they were also anti-Semitic. So most people who do heroic deeds do not expect to be heroes. They say, I did what I had to do. Here she is, a wonderful, she just died recently, this wonderful woman. So here's another Polish-American hero. She's the one who shut down the Stanford Prison Study. She was my graduate student, and she came down on Thursday night because I was having people who had no connection to the study interview all of us. She comes down, and it's the 10 o'clock toilet run. Prisoners in the bags over their heads, chains on their feet. The guards are cursing, yelling at them, hitting them, pushing them. And I look up and say, hey, Chris, look at this. Look at this interesting social psychology, crucible of human nature. And she says, it's terrible what you are doing to those boys. They're not guards, they're not prisoners, they're boys, and you are responsible. And we had a big argument, a big fight, and then she says, you have changed. We had just started dating. She says, I don't want to continue this relationship if this is the real you. Because I thought you were loving and caring, and this person, I don't know who this is. So, and this was August 1897. So she forced me to acknowledge that I had become the prison superintendent. And in that role, I was indifferent to the suffering. I didn't cause suffering. I allowed it to happen. I was indifferent to it. So I had to deal with her harshly. And what I did was I married her. In fact, we got married at the Stanford Chapel almost exactly a year later, and we had our 25th renewal of vows at the chapel, and we've been happily married for 36 years with wonderful kids. So situations have the power to do three things. It's the same exact situation that forces the hostile imagination in some people, pushes them across that line to do evil. That same situation inspires the heroic imagination in others. Joe Darby couldn't have done what he did if Abu Ghraib abuses weren't going on. Chris Maslach couldn't have done what she did if there wasn't the horrors of the Stanford Prison Study. So in all of these situations, the people who blow, the whistleblowers identifying corruption in business, there has to be the corruption for them to be able to challenge it. Most people are guilty of the evil of inaction. You know why? Because they follow their mother's injunction. Mind your own business, don't get involved. And if you do that, you live a long life. But you have to say, Mama, humanity is my business, I have to get involved. So we are starting a Heroic Imagination Foundation with logos like this. So here's the Dixie Chicks. Traitors, heroes, brave, boycott, Saddam's angels, simply because they challenged George Bush early on in the war. So we want to help people appreciate the bright white line of goodness, ordinary dignity, and everyday moral courage. We want to understand and unleash our inner heroes. So the psychology of heroism is we want to encourage children, families, everyone to develop this heroic imagination. To think of yourself as a hero in waiting for some situation to come along in which you will act. But you got to be prepared. So we're developing curriculum starting with the 5th grade all the way through college about the heroic imagination. You have to learn certain skills. If you're going to form a network, you have to have social influence skills. You have to learn to be a deviant. Because all heroes initially are deviant. They're violating the standard of the people around them. So the kids are going to practice being a deviant. So heroes are ordinary people whose social action is extraordinary. The key is, at that cartoon with Superman, you got to act when others are passive. I want to end with 2 short pieces. Here's Wesley Autry, New York subway hero. A white guy falls on the tracks. He's standing there with his daughters. He's got a reason not to get involved. That guy's white, he's black, he's got his kids. There are 75 other people there, they all freeze. And what he does is he turns to the stranger and says, take my kids. He jumps on the track to try to save the guy. And the subway is coming when he jumps down. And he said at the end, he survived. He said, barely. He survived by a half an inch. I did what anyone could do, but I did what everyone ought to do. So that's the moral imperative. I did what everyone ought to do. And when you see, he's the most ordinary person in the world.
On the New York City subway, it's hard enough finding someone who will give up his seat to a stranger, let alone be willing to give up his life for one.
The train was coming in like that.
It happened just 50-year-old Wesley Autry, a construction worker and Navy veteran, was standing on a subway platform with his two little girls when right in front of them, a man started having a seizure.
He kind of stumbled and over his own feet and fall backwards. I see a train coming, but the train is so close, I'm like, what do I do?
Wesley jumped onto the tracks and thought if he could just lie on top of the man, keep him from flailing, maybe the train would roll right over both of them. The clearance was exactly 21 inches. Wesley and the man, 20 and a half.
No way the train can stop before this gentleman could get him up off the tracks. So he covered him with his body and pushed him down to a point where the train wouldn't hit his head and held him down under the tracks while the train came and rolled right over the top of him.
It gave Wesley's children the scare of their young lives.
I thought he was going to get killed.
And Wesley, the scare of his, too.
I'm like talking to him, sir, you can't move. I got two kids up here looking for the father to come back. I don't know you, you don't know me, but listen, don't panic. You know, I'm here to save you.
As for the guy Wesley saved, he's 20-year-old Cameron Hollipter. And other than a few scrapes and bruises, his father says he's doing fine.
Mr. Autry's instinctive and unselfish act saved our son's life.
You know, the word hero gets thrown around a lot nowadays.
What a better way to start off the new year than to save a life.
So one day you will be in a new situation with three paths. Path one, you become a perpetrator of evil, whether it's corruption, whether it's in being involved on the dark side of that line. Path two, you're going to be guilty of the evil of inaction. You're going to know what's happening. Like all of us who had bullies in our class, and we were happy we weren't being bullied, and we looked the other way, and we never confronted the bully. But path three, you go straight ahead and become a hero. So the point is, are you ready to become an ordinary hero, waiting for the right situation to put heroic imagination into action? To be a hero needs only two things. You have to think it, and then you have to do it. You have to take action. So, as I said, our hero project is exploring and encouraging our inner heroes. Exploring is, there's no systematic research on heroism. The only research is archival interviews with people done years after the thing. So we're going to do experimental studies, survey studies, web-based studies, if we can get some money. Anybody out there got money? And then encouraging other people through curriculum development, through putting together, have a master website where there's lots of little pieces of people doing stuff on heroism, putting that all together. So I'm going to end with, I just discovered that I'm a virtual hero. I'm not a hero in my whole life, but apparently in virtual reality I am. Somebody told me, they sent me this thing, there's going to be a hero about my exploits. So I want to end showing you this Zimbardo, the hero movie. And then, unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave without questions because I got to be at the bookstore in 10 minutes.
He was head of the APA until he lost everything. Now, Philip Zimbardo is back, and he wants revenge. From the producer of Richard Gill and The Economist of Secrets, and the director of Mr. McCormick Goes to the Circus, comes an epic story of love.
It gets better.
Betrayal. And social psychology.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Stanford University. Please visit us at stanford.edu.